everyone, and welcome to Ovarian Cancer Australia's Information and Support webinar. My name is Vanessa Elford. I'm part of the support team here at OCA. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're on and pay my respect to elders past and present. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank the Maureen and E.H. Flack Trust for providing us with the funding to deliver this project. So the focus of this webinar will be on the sexual challenges and issues faced by women with ovarian cancer and the impact this may have on quality of life. We have three incredible presenters who are going to share some valuable information with you. The webinar is interactive, so over the next hour you can ask questions to the presenters by typing into the chat box in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. Questions will be answered at the end of each speaker's presentation. Please note that presenters cannot address individual medical cases. If you do have a particular question, please call the Ovarian Cancer Australia Information and Support line on 1300 660 334. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the Ovarian Cancer Australia website. Lastly, if you're having trouble with sound, you can dial the 1800 number listed in the chat box. So I'm extremely privileged to introduce our presenters to you. Our first presenter is Dr Haryana Dhillon. Dr Dhillon is a Senior Research Fellow in the School of Psychology at the University of Sydney. She's the Director of the Centre for Medical Psychology and Evidence-Based Decision-Making and co-leads the Survivorship Research Group within that centre. Dr Dhillon will talk about the role of sexual communication, navigating changed or sexual practices, and how to access support. Our second presenter is Dr Nadia Addabbo. Nadia was diagnosed with stage 2 ovarian cancer in 2010 at the age of 36. She will talk about her experience of navigating the illness and the challenges she has faced along the way, including loss of identity, independence, self-esteem, and the effect it has had on relationships and fertility. She'll share how she faces these challenges and continues to move forward with her life. And our third presenter is Maureen Winship. Maureen is a 62-year-old lady who was diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer in 2010 at the age of 54. In 2012, she was identified as having the BRCA1 mutation and had a double mastectomy and reconstruction in 2013. Maureen will share her story and the challenges she has faced around relationships, body image and self-esteem since her diagnosis. So it gives me great privilege now to hand over to Dr Haryana Dhillon.
Hi everyone, thank you very much for being with us today, and thank you to Vanessa for that very warm introduction. So what I'm going to do is to talk with you about some of the things that interest me, particularly what is sex, how cancer and its treatment can impact sexual function, how each of us respond to that, sometimes in quite different ways. I'm going to let you in on some secrets about the health professionals and their response to sex and talking about it, and some of the things that you might actually find helpful in dealing with sexual changes that you have experienced. So just so you know a little bit about me, because we are going to be talking about things that are fairly intimate. I grew up in northwest New South Wales in a very small village and moved to Sydney to go to university, where I still am, living just around the corner from where the Priscilla bus took off. I share my home with my partner and our two adolescent young adult sons, who are really not particularly impressed that their mother trots around the country and the world talking about sex. So that's a good point for us to move on to talking about what is sex and sexuality. So sexuality is not just sex. It's not just about intimacy. It's not just about intimacy or sexual intercourse. It's about who you are. It's how you see yourself, and how you express yourself sexually and your sexual feelings for others. It's an expression of intimacy, but it's very much part of our self-identity, and that can be different for each one of us. Everyone has their individual sexuality and the way that they express that. And I think it's really important to remember when we're talking about sexual health and sexual dysfunction that sexual health really is not just the absence of sexual dysfunction or problem. It's actually about a state of sexual well-being and wholeness, I guess. And that's one of the things that sometimes can be quite challenging in the cancer context. Before we get too far into this, I also just wanted to make sure that everyone's clear and understands that I'm not suggesting that everybody has to be interested in sex. It's not a requirement for living. and I'm not making any judgments about that. So my job here really is to talk about if sex is a concern for you and you want to think and talk more about it, then there are places that you can go to seek help for that. So my job is to really talk to us about that rather than tell you that you should be thinking about sex all the time. So what we know really is that sexual difficulties or dysfunction are very common, with around 43% of the general population reporting some kinds of sexual concern. So it's not just a problem for people who are unwell or have had a diagnosis of cancer or some other illness. But we do know that somewhere between 30 and 100% of women who have had ovarian cancer diagnosis will talk about disruption and trouble with sexual function and sexuality. Some of the reasons, some people may find sex painful, and that can be a result of some of the treatments that you may have experienced. So, particularly related to scarring or shortening of the vagina. Vaginal dryness is very common post-cancer treatment, and sometimes there can be an emotional component where you fear pain as part of sexual intercourse, and that really exacerbates the experience and increases the pain intensity. Some people talk about having trouble climaxing, and that can also be related to your medical treatment, particularly if you've had surgery in the pelvic region. That can really affect the nerve endings and the nerve connections around the genital areas. Antidepressant medication can make a difference and can suppress libido. Fatigue can be a real suppressant, and how you're feeling emotionally is potentially a problem. One of the great things about cancer is that we're starting to talk about these things, whereas in other illnesses where it's not just a problem for cancer, it's a problem in other areas, and we really just tend to sort of ignore it or not discuss it as health professionals. And I think it's really important for us to remember that. One of the other things that I wanted to highlight is that sexual function or illness and treatment can affect pretty much every aspect of the human sexual response cycle. So you can see here on this graph is the human response cycle, which starts with desire, moves up into arousal, up into orgasm, and then resolution and satisfaction. But what we know is that our altered perceptions of ourselves, our body image changes, anxiety, depression, and many other things can impact on our desire to have sex. And particularly in women after ovarian cancer, around 25 to, or sort of a quarter to almost two-thirds, talk about no or low sexual desire. So that's a very common experience that people have. And somewhere between a quarter and, again, a similar number have difficulty with arousal or lubrication. Again, around a third will have problems with orgasm, and somewhere between 30 and 40% will talk about pain with intercourse. And unlike other areas or in after cancer, a cancer diagnosis, sexual function is something that sometimes deteriorates or gets worse over time rather than better. So we really do need to deal with the issues if they're there. And we also know that around a third to a half of people impacted by a cancer diagnosis will become sexually inactive after their diagnosis. And that sometimes that can be associated then with a poorer quality of life and depressed mood. And sex consistently ranks among one of the top 5 unmet needs that cancer survivors report. So they're all things that we can be, conscious of and aware of. And again, just talking through these things, so we know that anxiety and depression or hormonal imbalances, or particularly peripheral neuropathy, can impact on arousal. And anxiety and altered sensations can impact on orgasm. And sometimes people will experience postcoital bleeding or pain, and that really contributes very much to reduced sexual enjoyment. But there are lots of things that we don't like to talk about, and sex is definitely one of them. And one of the things that comes up quite frequently is the stigma associated with sex and sexual function. Stigma is a mark of disgrace that's associated with particular circumstances or a quality or an individual. And sometimes the things that drive us to avoid talking about things is the fear that we're actually going to create some kind of disapproval or some kind of revulsion, or disgust response in someone else. And that can be really unpleasant to sit on the other side of the table if someone's responding to you in a way that makes you feel stigmatised. So I think we tend to try and avoid these conversations because you're never sure of the response that you're going to get because sex is so much tied up with taboo kinds of conversation, social taboos. I think I've probably talked enough about stigma, really, other than to say that once you start feeling that there is stigma, that you are experiencing stigma, it can be really reinforcing and it can be a strong message to not raise these topics again. So I mentioned to you earlier that I was going to tell you a little secret about health professionals. Well, many of them, and in fact I probably would say most, are not comfortable with talking about intimacy and sex with their patients. They find it really difficult. They're particularly worried that they're not going to have the answers that you need. They also think that maybe they don't know where to refer you for additional support. And most of them are not trained in sex therapy and have little interest or expertise in that area, plus the workload of cancer centres. They have a tendency to really focus on fixable problems rather than things that they're not sure about. So really devaluing the role of talking or sharing as a therapeutic tool. So they may not ask, and you often as patients or people in the system pick up on their discomfort, and that becomes a barrier to you asking them again. So I think one of the key messages I think that we need to take away as individuals is the permission to actually start asking health professionals about these things and starting the conversation maybe with I'm not sure if you're going to be able to help me with this, but maybe we could work out where I could go for advice. So taking the onus off them to know everything. I think we also quite commonly have some pretty unrealistic expectations about sex, and here we're calling them sex expectations. And these can be things like there's only one way to have sex, I've had some good years and now the sex is over, and a range of other things. And I think what's kind of key to this is that it's underpinned by the idea that there's only one way to have sex, and that there's a very strong emphasis on penetrative sex as being the most important or the only way that you can engage in sexual activity. But there are lots of other things that can counter those unrealistic expectations that particularly relate to that sex can still feel good. You don't have to orgasm to feel satisfied, and that sex can be part of your life in all sorts of different ways. And I think one of the things that people find really challenging is not being able to be spontaneous. So there can be quite a lot of fun in planning for sex as opposed to expecting it to occur spontaneously. So there's some things to sort of keep in mind as challenges to the way that we think about things. When we did some work with cancer survivors, the key thing that we learned from them was that communication is incredibly important. In a survey that we did, it really highlighted the importance of communication and that people felt a really strong need for self-guided communication skills training to talk about sexual concerns. And I think that's one of the challenges that we maybe underestimate is that when you've got a healthy, happy sexual relationship, or that's been your experience previously, you may not have a dialogue or a language to share those concerns. And so one of the things that you're doing is you're navigating this new changed body and world that you're experiencing is actually then having to start having conversations with partners or potential partners that you've never had to consider before. And that can be quite a difficult transition and a difficult thing to do. People told us particularly that the things that made it difficult to talk about sex were changes in their relationship perceptions, identity conflicts and not knowing what to call themselves, challenges to masculinity or femininity, and their sexual self-efficacy, so how confident they felt that they could actually manage these things. The things that we know help really are facilitating communication with partners, where there is a physical problem to treat that, or a physical or a psychological or a social problem, to really address that issue rather than letting it ride, and trying to minimise the effects of anatomical changes and provide symptom relief and so on. and particularly providing some information and advice about alternative methods for engaging in intimacy or giving and receiving pleasure. And sometimes people really would like to seek additional support from specialist services. So some of the things that we know are helpful for particularly female genital pain are the use of vaginal moisturisers. There are non-hormonal over-the-counter products that are available, but they need to be used regularly in order to be effective. And I think that's one of the things that's really challenging sometimes about changing sexual function is that some of these things we really need to plan to use on a regular basis. And that may take some time before we're actually ready to engage in sexual intimacy, even after we're using them. Personal lubricants are also available. There's liquids and gels that are applied to the genital area to minimise dryness and pain during sexual activity. Anyone that's had pelvic radiotherapy may have seen vaginal dilators and been advised to use them, but they're particularly useful to try and make sure that the vagina stays elastic and is still functioning well. But they're best used after the vagina's been fully healed, which is about 4 or 6 weeks after treatment ends. Kegel exercises, I can't say enough about. They're really a very effective way of trying to managing changes in the genital region, particularly. They teach pelvic control, which will help you relax your vagina at different times, and can particularly help to release tension and the vagina before sex, so it's less painful. It increases the pelvic floor strength, which can also increase arousal and the ability to sort of focus on the pleasure of sex. And partners can sometimes feel vaginal movements as well. So those things are all positive. But I have to say, for those of you who have male partners, then you might want to suggest that they engage in Kegel exercises because it works really well for them as well. And it's effective in increasing erections as well. So other things that we can do to try and avoid pain or options to minimise pain during sex is to plan for that when you feel less pain. So if you take pain medication, try and take that ahead of time so it's already effective before you start your sexual activity and intimacy. Focus on the feelings that you have about excitement and connection with your partner, so playful touching, non-coital sexual activity. So as I said earlier, we've got this really big focus in our culture on penetrative sex as being the only thing that can happen, but you can experience a great deal of intimacy and pleasure just by focusing on gentle touching and with one of the strategies that we can use sometimes to re-establish intimate relationships is that sensate focus approach where you actually agree to not engage in sexual intercourse or achieving orgasm, but to really focus on all of the erogenous areas of the body that can give you pleasure just by gentle touching. Trying different positions can be really helpful. Gentle touching. Trying different positions can be really helpful. So working out what works for you. So as we move through life, things change quite a lot, and this is one of the things that's really useful to consider as well. Psychological interventions can help, particularly focusing on intimacy and the physical connection that you have with people, but not necessarily sexual intercourse. And definitely communication skills training to talk to partners, helping talk to partners and just being able to express what we need out loud. There are barriers, though, to uptake and retention of psychological interventions. Often people are not aware that there are available resources or can't find a person that's happy to talk to them about these things. They lack referral. And there are some levels of embarrassment either from the patients or from the providers in having these conversations, or a lack of engagement from either or both partners who are involved in the discussion. And I think we probably are really not good at paying attention to partners. Their sexual needs or their needs more broadly even are not necessarily included or assessed as part of a cancer experience. So really, in summary, I just wanted to really emphasise that sexual concerns are common and they're real. Healthcare professionals may not make it easy for you to talk about sex, but there are interventions available that really can help to address some of these concerns. And sometimes a successful sexual relationship is really about redefining sex. And it's always about being able to communicate your needs. So I'm looking forward to answering questions during the rest of this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dhillon.
Pleasure.
Am I on air? Yes. Thank you very much, Dr. Dhillon, for that valuable information and for talking about issues that really a lot of people find very difficult to talk about. So we really, really appreciate it. So we do have one question for you that's come up. And somebody has said, I feel like my partner is no longer attracted to me as he no longer initiates sex. How can I bring this up?
Mm-hmm. So I think that's something that is a very common experience for people after a cancer diagnosis. It can be really challenging to engage around that. And I think my strongest statement about this is really that until you ask, you don't know what's really going on in his head. So, you know, a partner in that situation may be feeling as though they don't want to pressure their partner. They may be really willing to re-engage in sex, but not sure how to go about doing that, and also not sure about how to raise it themselves. So I think if people have concerns about that, then I would say if you're feeling strong enough and confident enough, then I would raise those issues directly. But I guess my one concern would be that sometimes relationships do change dramatically as a result of these sorts of life-changing experiences. So you do need to be prepared and have a safety net around you in case that conversation doesn't go the way that you expect it to or maybe want it to. So having some support close by, you know, the people that you can trust that may actually help in the immediate aftermath of a conversation that goes more difficultly. But I guess our more common experience is that it's fear on the side of the partners to not wanting to pressure someone who's had a cancer experience and really just trying to be careful of them. And so once you start to say it's okay, we just might need to think about how we do this a little bit differently, that can really break the ice.
Yeah, thank you very much. And we've just had somebody write in and say, I find my partner is often aroused and I'm not meeting his needs as I don't feel the desire and I feel pressured to be sexually active more often.
Yeah, and I guess, again, I think it really comes down to those conversations and being able to be honest about that. And so whether or not, mutual, masturbation or other sorts of sexual activities would be something that you would be willing to engage in with your partner, that might be a strategy. And I guess it depends a little bit on how much energy you have to be giving to other people at this point. So I guess my other concern is that lots of times we're just really tired after, in life anyway, and then particularly after having had a cancer diagnosis and treatment, that fatigue that just sort of sits with you sometimes can be really just push all of that libido down so much that it's just very hard to reach. And again, I think it's a matter of being able to communicate and be honest about that and see whether there are ways that you might be able to together address, both of your needs in that moment.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Dhillon. Really appreciate your time and all that valuable information. So it now gives me great pleasure to introduce or to hand over, to our next speaker, Nadia Addabbo. Nadia, I'll hand it over to you.
Hi. Sorry, it says I'm off here. Can you hear me or?
We can hear you.
Okay, sorry, I'm just getting confused. Oh, there we go. Hi, so my name's Nadia. In 2010, I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. I guess lucky enough for it to be stage 2, sort of rather than further advanced, but still serious enough to really have a huge impact on my life. Being 36 and being single at the time, it was, I guess not really what I was hoping to do with my life at that stage. And, the trauma and the stress of going through the diagnosis was obviously particularly difficult. Having not had children, it became pretty clear pretty well straight away that fertility was going to be probably one of my biggest challenges, and in terms of sort of, firstly, obviously needing to navigate the diagnosis, but then what are the costs of the diagnosis to myself, to my life, and to my future, and what does that mean, I guess, who am I sort of, through the treatment, through the cancer, and then post-cancer as well. So with, great support networks from all of my medical team, from surgeons to then chemo, radio, and then a lot of holistic help that I did for myself, and a good support network with my family, I went from being, an independent, self-sufficient, single income family of my own to not having, or luckily enough not needing to work straight away because I had some insurance that could cover it, but then having my mum move in with me, losing all ability to really basically be independent and have the ability to really just be, I guess, sufficient and proficient with what my lifestyle was for, which was social, it was active with friends, family, various relationships. And then so the change at that stage was very difficult, and I guess the loss of independence and then what that then meant to, how that changed who I was and how I navigate through that process. And I guess one of the first things was, accepting a scar that went, from your belly button all the way down, and thinking, okay, so my body's changing dramatically, and how do I then engage with this body going forward when it's not doing what I want it to do, or I can't even walk around the block without being in pain after surgery. And, I've people twice or three times my age can lap me in the park while I'm just walking very slowly. So all of those physical issues plus all of the emotional issues were, pretty active from the start, from diagnosis through surgery, through treatment. And yeah, I guess, bunkered down and just tried to get through as best I could, and I could definitely see emotionally I was unravelling by the end of it. So by the time I physically finished all my treatment, I sought help with a psycho-oncologist. And that was really quite wonderful to normalise, I guess, my existence and my life, and help me figure out how to go on, and I guess how to start to, I guess, bring things to the forefront, like how do I actually, get over the fear of recurrence? How do I actually get over, what's happened to my body and the fact that I've lost trust in my body and what I can do, or what its boundaries, and then more importantly, what does that mean for me going forward as a single person who wants to be in a relationship? What sort of, person would want someone who couldn't have children? So all of those things became, even now, 7 years later, really quite emotional to deal with. And it's that fertility issue and that who would want me now issue, and also the I guess, people I was dating pre to post would also be quite different, because I was also quite different. So there was lots of confusion and lots of uncertainty and a lot of questions based around, at the core, the intimate relationship firstly with myself, and then my desire to, move on from that point as well. So it's, it's been a challenging, part of my life, and it's been a really difficult thing to navigate. I still feel the grief and the loss for my fertility, which, has been forefront, and in, a year or two post all the treatment, thinking, okay, I actually want to be in a relationship. How does that look? How do I look? How do I present? I tried internet dating, which was just a huge failure for me, and tried thinking, okay, so the sort of men that I want to look at, or the sort of relationship I want to be in, who would that be? How does that, and it all just kept coming back to, for me, what does the relationship look like in the future? Because I was confident that I wanted one, and I wanted to be in a relationship, not because I was afraid to be alone, but because I wanted to share my life. But I also knew that sharing my life with someone who wanted children meant that I would also be leaving myself open to rejection, because that was something that was not going to be possible for me without huge medical intervention or huge, amount of work in terms of adoption, and it just felt all too much. And then, in the mix of all of that, sort of, I guess getting on HRT, the sort of, basically control sort of the menopause phase of my life that I didn't want to sort of quite get into at the same time. So it was all very complicated and, very overwhelming through that whole process. And I think it just kept coming back to addressing one step at a time, what would make me happy, what do I need to do for me, and what's the relationship like with myself first, and then how does that create a relationship with someone in the future, and then how do I navigate that, and then how do I navigate when we do finally, want to be intimate, how does that feel with my body being different, and how does that feel if then I get rejected because they're wanting a family and I couldn't. So I definitely had, that really crazy dialogue going on in my mind about all of that, and that really crazy dialogue going on, and also rejection through all of that. That was quite challenging to bear. So for me, this topic, I guess, is very close to my heart, because it's really been one of the biggest challenges in what has changed in my life, because of my diagnosis and because of, surgery that I opted to have, that then really changed what was going to happen to me going forward. Fast forward a few years later, and, a friend introduced me to someone, and we started dating and talking and stuff, and he was very upfront at the start that he didn't want kids, and because he already had a family, and I really respected and really valued his honesty with me from the start, that if I wanted to pursue children, then we should just not pursue our relationship. And that was a really pivotal point for me in terms of thinking, okay, so, by that stage I was probably getting close to 38, 39, and I'm thinking, what does this mean for me going forward? And maybe in this life children aren't meant for me, so if I let go of that for me, not for anyone else, and then I move forward into what could be a potentially good relationship, what does that mean then for me in my life? And now I've got lots of dogs, so they're my little fur babies, and that makes a big difference. And, my partner and I are still together from that point, but I don't feel I'm with him because I've compromised or he's compromised, but I feel like we had a very mature and very honest discussion really early on about what are the not negotiables for us in terms of sustaining. So there's no resentment and there's no feeling of missing out. And then as our relationship progressed and as I started to feel safer with him and more sure in myself and my body, then I think the real healing for my body and for myself and my soul continued, and I think still does continue to now. So I guess that's my story in a nutshell, and how, this diagnosis has really shaped sort of, the last 7 or 8 years of my life, and how it's going to probably continue to shape my life as I see my nieces and nephew grow up, and as I keep trying to convince my partner to have more dogs at home so I can fulfill that need of being mother. That feels sort of pretty well where I'm at, but it also feels like a really positive place from something that was really challenging and really confronting and so intimate, so intimate on the deepest level as well, and just to move through.
Well, thank you so much, Nadia, for that fantastic presentation, and just for being so upfront and honest and open in sharing your story. We really, really appreciate it. So just one question that's come up, and just a reminder to those on the webinar, if you'd like to ask a question to our presenters, just in the bottom left-hand corner, there's a little chat box, so just type it in there. So the question is, do you think that your experience would have been different if you'd had a partner when you were diagnosed?
Yeah, I think my experience would have been different, with a partner in diagnosis, because, and I don't think that would have made it necessarily better or worse, but potentially at that stage we would have maybe already, I guess, assessed the issue of children or not children. So I think in my mind, if I'd had a partner earlier on in my life and I'd had children, then maybe that was my opportunity to have kids then versus, and I think that's probably, for me, other than physical support, that's really the big thing about not having a partner at that stage in my life and not sort of, being able to have had children earlier or choosing to have children earlier or going forward as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much again. We really appreciate giving up your time. So it now gives me great pleasure in introducing our third and final speaker to you, Maureen Winship. They're just doing a little swap over, and Maureen will be with us. Thank you, Maureen. I'll hand it over to you.
Hi, thank you. Well, hi, my name is Maureen and I'm a cancer survivor and also a peer support volunteer with Counterpart, formerly known as FreeCan. And like many other women, I had a history of girly problems, heavy periods, cramping and such. But throughout 2010, my fatigue and pain levels really ramped up. After struggling to get any sort of diagnosis, I eventually changed doctors, and after a few tests, a theatre bed was booked to remove what was thought to be a rather suspicious right ovary. What I didn't know when I entered surgery that day, and what nobody else was really expecting, was that my life was about to be irrevocably changed. On that December day in 2010, it was discovered that I had ovarian cancer.
Use the microphone down.
Okay. It had indeed started my right ovary, but had also spread to my left ovary. Both fallopian tubes, my uterus, cervix, bowel, omentum, and so on. It was everywhere. Of course, my surgery ended up being far more extensive than originally planned, and yet, when I awoke in recovery and was told what had happened, I was oddly at peace with the world and just relieved to finally have an answer, and an answer that I thought we could work with. When my doctor sat with me a few days later, gently holding me in her arms, she said that whilst everything possible would be done for me, she thought that I should consider giving up work and spending what time I had with my new granddaughter. Wow. So I went home and began a gruelling 5 months of chemo, with plans for scans and further surgeries and facing a very uncertain future. Now, I would like to be able to say that the unwavering love and support I received from my husband and supposed soulmate was a contributing factor to my survival. But sadly, I can't. Suffice to say, our physical and emotional marriage pretty much ended the day that I received my diagnosis. My 3 adult children handled it really well, but my husband of nearly 40 years didn't handle it quite so well. Oh, sure, he cried in the corner of my hospital room, but he wouldn't come near my bed. He sobbed when he made the phone calls to inform family and friends, but in private he was dry-eyed and he had nothing to say to me. And later, when I was going through my treatment, and I lost all of my hair, he refused to hold me and even said I was ugly. And yet he had no trouble holding my girlfriends and comforting them throughout my ordeal. You see, that was supposedly okay because he assured me they needed it. Now, I don't know if it was pride or shame, but I kept his rejection and neglect of me a secret from everyone. I couldn't understand how my husband, the father of my children, could be so cruel and so cold. And I doubted very much if any of our family or friends would even believe it possible. Outwardly, I think we had always presented as the perfect couple, although in private I must admit there had always been some degree of compromise and bullying. Although I had always believed that we would grow old together. Anyway, I managed to get through my treatment, and then my oncologist referred me to the Familial Cancer Centre for genetic testing. And yes, it was discovered that I did in fact carry the BRCA gene mutation. In my case, BRCA1. This meant that I was in the high risk category for not only ovarian cancer, but for breast cancer too. Yay. So, more doctors, more tests, more consults, and finally my team gave me the news. They wanted to remove both of my breasts, just to be safe. There was nothing wrong with them. In fact, they were pretty awesome, but they had to go. Well, as you now know, I had already been stripped of my entire reproductive system and a few bits more. So my breasts were like the final bastion of my femininity, my womanhood. But I gave it a lot of thought, and in 2013 I underwent 10.5 hours of surgery to have a bilateral mastectomy and a diaphragm reconstruction. Wow, those guys are miracle workers. I can honestly say that I have not had a moment's regret about my decision to lose my girls. Now, as I'm sure anyone who has undergone any sort of cancer experience will attest, it changes you. It changes you a lot. Whether you've just had a brush with it or a full-blown, gut-wrenching ordeal, cancer leaves its mark. It saps your strength, your confidence, your autonomy, It rocks the rock that you stand on. Whether it be your confidence, your self-image, your drive, your relationship, your friends, or any of a million other things, having cancer can rob you of it. For me, it wasn't just the surgeries, or chemo, or instant menopause, hair loss, weight gain, mood swings, or any of the numerous other treatment side effects that we all know and love. But it was also the breakdown of a 40-year relationship. The hurt of being rejected and spurned and then replaced by a string of women half my age. Once the anger and bickering subsided, I think I just went numb. I was living with a whole world of hurt and betrayal, and ultimately I put up a wall, switched off. For a few years there, I just didn't feel anything. I was too busy getting on with life, trying to cope with the new me, untangling the legal ties of a marriage that was no more, finding my way in the world as a single person, and discovering just who I was now. So, don't know when it happened. There was no warning or fanfare. Nobody else noticed anything. Like a leaf falling from a tree, just happened. I came back. My body woke up from its hiatus, gave me a nudge. This amazing body, with all of its scars, and yes, I still see every one of them, this amazing body just woke up again one day, started to feel again, really feel the urges and drives that had been dormant and really not missed came back. I know I don't look the way I used to. I don't exactly feel the way I used to either. Then again, nor should I. I've been on a journey that we are not all privileged enough to survive. And I respect that. The love I have for my body, even now, with all its imperfections, is insurmountable. It's what allows me to be my glorious self. But am I ready to share my scars with someone else in an intimate way? I think the real question for me here is whether I'm ready to open myself up to trust someone again. Because whilst my body may well be telling me it's ready, I'm not entirely sure my heart is yet. But I don't mind looking. Meanwhile, let me just say, my life is very good and filled with love of family and friends. My new girls are simply amazing and a credit to my surgical team. And I really am one very happy and extremely fortunate individual. And I am very grateful for that. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Maureen.
You're welcome.
Check that I'm on air. Thank you so much, Maureen. What an incredible, honest insight into your journey and experience. We really appreciate you sharing that with us. So we've had a couple of questions come up. One is, what do you think your husband's mind, what do you think went through your husband's mind when you were diagnosed?
Look, I had spoken with my husband about this, and apparently the enormity of my diagnosis was just too much for him to handle. And the physical challenges that I was to endure throughout my treatment and even beyond only horrified and disgusted him, really. Needless to say, there was no further intimacy in our relationship from that December day. Certainly no affection, compassion or solace, sadly. But there was a lot of dissension, grief and indifference that not what one would consider to be conducive to a healing environment, surely.
And the other question, I guess, similar or related to that is, what's your relationship with him like now?
Oh, look, I no longer blame him for failing me in my darkest hours. I've come to understand that not everyone is equipped to deal with challenges in the same way. I am sad that my marriage broke down, certainly, but realistically it had to. We both lead very different lives now. Really, we're very different people now. But we speak amicably if our paths cross. He now lives in Malaysia with one of his latest girlfriends, so we really don't see each other very often. I have encouraged him to have good good relationships with our children and encourage the kids to still see him and try to keep that going. But yeah, as for he and I, we're just amicable now.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing, and I'm sure we can all learn something from that. You know, your attitude, just unbelievable, really inspirational. So thank you once again, Maureen, for giving up your time and speaking on our webinar. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Pleasure.
So I'd just like to say a big thank you once again to our presenters, Dr Haryana Dhillon, Nadia, Addabbo and Maureen Winship. We really appreciate the information that you've shared and your stories and experiences and the time that you've given us today. I'd also like to thank everybody who has been on the webinar. We really hope that you found it valuable. The recording of this webinar will be posted on our website, the OCA website, and you will receive an email with a link to the recording in the next few days. In a moment, you'll be directed to an evaluation form. If you could please take a moment to fill this in, as that's, your feedback is really extremely important to us and will help us to plan and develop future webinars. So just to finish off, if you have any other questions that you would like addressed, please don't hesitate to contact our information and support line on 1300 660 334. Thank you everyone once again for being on this webinar. We really appreciate it and we hope to see you for our next webinar. Goodbye for now.